Okay, we are back. Let's keep going through these sections here. Okay. 60. We see section 60. It says, "Can you embrace the one? Can you cleanse and polish and purify the bright mirror of your soul? Your soul is one part of the way and should mirror the one way, the universal way. Can you concentrate and focus your breath and energy? Can you step outside of yourself and understand everything within the four reaches, the four corners of the universe?" 61 goes on and it says, "Empty yourself of all particular desires and let the Tao fill you and move through you and use you as part of the pattern." Okay. So, something I want to say here is, this seems to be asking quite a lot. It seems to be talking about what the sage might do as almost a superhuman, right? As someone who's so far removed from you and I and our sort of average capabilities, it might seem like the bar is set too high. Once more, though, I'd like to point out that this might be part of the value of philosophy, is that it can set the bar really high. It can ask you for a level of understanding and moral goodness that most people don't have. On the one hand, we might say, possible objection or skeptical response, it's asking too much. But what I think philosophy's standard response is to it asks too much, it's not realistic, etc., is that, again, you have models for the realistic. You see sometimes people, they'll say, I'm a good person, I pay my taxes, I don't beat anyone up. And it reminds me of this Chris Rock, the comedian Chris Rock. It reminds me of a skit he has. He says, oh, you've got some people that are like, you know, I'm a good dad, I feed my kids, or like, I'm a good dad, I pay my child support. And he's like, do you want a cookie? I'm not going to give you some reward or great praise because you're, quote, a good person for doing the minimum, right? Okay. So even if, I don't know if it's true or not, but even if philosophy, Daoism, etc., might sometimes seem to ask too much, if you don't ask too much of yourself, you will just live up to what you do ask yourself for. So if you set the bar for being a good person at not committing crimes, then that's probably all you're going to do, because it's all you've told yourself you need to do. But if you put your ideals even higher, embracing the one, being a pure mirror to reflect the entire universe and the entire flow of the universe, well, you might not perfectly achieve that ever, but don't you think even in the attempt that you will live a more purified, a more beautiful life just for having a high ideal that you're on the way, the path toward, right? So I think that's something interesting. That's an interesting idea we have floating here. Just so you know, if you want more on non-action, the theme we've been dealing with in part today, 55 speaks of it. 62 definitely speaks on it. Let's see. Section 102 speaks on it. 85. So all those could be pulled together on this theme of non-action. There's definitely other sections as well. Just skimming through my notes here, those are ones I'm seeing. Okay. So I'm going to hit you some more sort of philosophy 100, philosophy 101 kind of ideas. These will pop up in different ways in different authors. But part of it is I'm going to repeat them because every one of them says it differently. Every one of them pulls out some cool aspect of it that the others didn't talk about. Okay, that's one reason I'll keep highlighting this. A second reason is that it really is one of the fundamental ways to think about what philosophy is that philosophy is sort of the deep counterculture. It's like the permanent counterculture. It's always questioning whether the status quo is really good enough. It's always questioning whether the common received opinions, the stuff that mom and dad told you before you were too young to think for yourself, that you now still believe, whether that's really best representation of reality. Okay, so whether it's Laozi, he was sort of a rebel against the Confucian ideas of his time. Confucianism is a different sort of ancient Chinese, contemporary Chinese philosophical system. Socrates being a rebel against the Athens of his time. Nietzsche, Beauvoir, all these people are sort of rebels, and they became rebels by doing philosophy. Okay? They all have lives that people still write books about, and not just philosophy books, but even popular books. They've had a great impact, and it wasn't by going with the flow of the everyday social. The flow that Daoism is talking about going along with is the natural universal flow, which is exactly what most people are fighting against in their day-to-day life. So just a few sections that emphasize, again, I think it's important to expose people to it in their first Philosophy 100 class. Philosophy has this idea of being countercultural, being a rebel against the sort of crushing monotony of what everyone else tells you should be doing. 64, Laozi says, "My words are easy to understand and put into practice, but few understand and few put them into practice." Okay, so philosophy is a rare task. He says, but 65, if everyone already understood and agreed and loved Taoism or philosophy, what use would I be? It's because few understand that I, as a teacher, might be of great value. So if everyone already agreed with this, there'd be no point in being a philosopher to teach people, because everyone would already know, and you'd get no credit for just doing what came naturally to everyone. And then he says, 66, a few will stop to hear me talking about the Tao or the way, but everyone will stop for free food, right? You'll notice on campus when someone wants information or wants your support, they want you to volunteer. If you just have a sign that says information about philosophy majors or please volunteer for the blood drive, ain't nobody gonna stop at that table. I've manned these tables before, I know. But if you have free food out, people will come up to the table. Everyone will stop if you put free food out. Okay? The common temptations are there, and they affect all of us. Laozi eats food too, and I love free food, right? But the common temptations aren't what's pushing us forward, right? We need something extra too. In 69 and 70, we see, once again, Daoism says if you really want to be yourself, you have to let go of yourself. If you really want to be happy and good, you have to relax your grip on what you think will make you happy and good. And the reason why, again, is that you have to admit, be modest. It's hard to know the truth. I don't know the truth 100%. You don't know the truth 100%. Neither Socrates or Laozi knew the truth 100%. But if you only focus on what you think you know, if you only chase what you feel certain about, you will actually just shoot yourself in the foot. So 70 says, self-praise is no praise at all. If you're describing an illusionary carriage or car, dream whatever you want, embellish however you want, but there's still no carriage. So when you misunderstand the world that you pursue, and when you misunderstand yourself and who you are, then all your desire and activity is going to be squandered. Okay? If you're constantly talking about, I am this way, you'll never be able to change. And if you keep telling people, this is why I'm so great, you'll be like 71, the jade necklace that shines brightly and jingles constantly. But the sage, the one who's happiest and most knowledgeable, she does not jingle and shine like the jade. She just rumbles occasionally like a rock. It's a beautiful image, right? And once more, our experience, I bet, backs us up when we look at other people. We all have the friend who's all flash, all style, no substance. We all have the friend who we know is a little bit shady, but they sure seem like a straight arrow because they're so good at lying that no one knows they're lying. Right? It's easy to look at other people and see these lessons. But think about how many people you know who self-deceive or who deceive others. How many people do you know who claim that they're experts on something, and then when you hear them talk about it, they're not saying anything deep or new or true? It's just cliches. Well, the problem is, if that's true of other people, it might be true of you and I as well. And that's the hard part to accept. Right? But those who are more practiced in philosophy, more practiced in Taoism, they have moved a little bit further away from that. And part of it is by knowing that they don't know everything they think they know. And part of it is by knowing that not everything they think is good is all that good, and not everything they think is bad is all that bad. Remember, I'm using different sections now, but to give us a different angle on some of the main themes we're dealing with today. How do you let go of your own self-desires? Not selfish, but just self-directed. And how do you try to admit that you don't necessarily know everything that's good and everything that's bad? Okay. Moving on, I really like this section 75. It says, look for virtue and success, and you find them everywhere. But if you're looking for failure and loss, they will constantly befall you, or they will constantly happen to you. This is another example of the optimism or the hope, one of the values or benefits of philosophy. You may have already had this idea, but Daoism can help remind you of it and center you on it. That if you if you're negative all the time and you're constantly thinking the worst in other people and constantly worried about what bad things are going to happen to you, they happen, right? You don't avoid bad things by constantly obsessing about bad things. Okay, on to another point. You remember that part of what I've been saying today is that part of what I've been pointing out is, oh, this passage says an idea, but these other sections or passages say similar ideas. And that you can reinforce, better understand an idea in general in philosophy by seeing where connected ideas show up. Okay, so that's a general practice in our class. I won't just tell you Nietzsche said X, Y, Z. I won't just say Taoism says A, B, C, D. I will point to places in the reading where they say it and show you how one part, page 22, connects to another part, page 50. Right? It's not just about memorizing what I say they said, but finding different places in the reading that sort of all nudge together and connect. So another thing I've been saying is that Taoism is one kind of philosophy. The kind of philosophy that gestures towards the truth instead of trying to nail down with names and technical jargon every little last detail. Taoism doesn't want to try to prove to you the truth because it thinks the universe in the world is too big to just be chained up by a proof. But it still thinks the truth is out there, and it'll gesture, it'll point, it'll use poetic imagery to get you to think about your own life, to let you move down the path in the way, instead of you being dragged down the path by the teacher. Cool. But even Taoism, even with all this intuition and mysticism and letting be and admitting that we don't know, still does something else that philosophy often does. It still backs up and supports its ideas. So what we'll call argumentation in philosophy, not arguing like saying, I think you're wrong and I think you're dumb, but arguing as in presenting evidence like a lawyer does for a case, that kind of argumentation. Even Taoism, which is more on the intuitive gesturing at the truth side, even it will sort of give partial arguments and proof for what it does. Because otherwise, why should you believe it at all? Right? If it just says, oh, things are like water, cool. It's got to somehow support it, and it does it in its own way. And part of what I want to say is, you want to draw together these different sections that you think support and explain each other. I'm going to give you an example here. This is one of the ways that Taoism supports and makes partial arguments, even though it doesn't focus on that. It still gives you ideas that support other ideas, examples that prove other ideas, etc. I'm looking at section 77, and I see it connected to sections 2, 6, 12, 16, 72 and 73 read together, 79 and 106. All of these mutually support each other. All of them add a little something to the other one that helps deepen or extend the idea. Therefore, all of them do something like philosophical argumentation, which just means giving proof, evidence, or support for your claims about the world. Okay? So 77 says, too much light causes blindness. Too much sound causes deafness. Too much indulgence in physical pleasures causes distraction and dissipation. Basically, you get fat and lazy if you do too much of this. Have too many possessions impedes traveling on the way. So part of what Taoism's saying here is too much of anything causes the opposite. Light is how we see. Too much light blinds. That's a claim about the world that's either right or wrong. Taoism believes that it's right, so they want to prove it to you. They back it up by pointing to personal experiences that you've had before. You've all probably looked at the sun a little too long and been blinded by the light, blinded by the very thing that allows you to see, right? And these other examples about the only reason the wheel can move is because it's empty, and the only reason the cart can move is because it's not the wheel that moves it, and the wheel needs the cart, and the cart needs the wheel, right? Taoism points through poetic images to things in your life that you've surely experienced, and that's part of how it supports or backs itself up. Then what it does is in other parts of the Tao Te Ching, the book we're reading, it gives similar but different examples to sort of shade or fill out or color in the example to make it more and more real and more believable. Once more, all philosophy does that. Taoism, as a unique philosophy, does it in its own unique way. But this is something you're going to want to see in all the philosophy we read. Find what kind of proof they give. Find the evidence they give. It will be a different kind of evidence in each one of the philosophers we read. But they never simply blab their opinion. And I never expect you to only get what they said. Water is the strongest. I always want to know why they said it, what support they gave for it. Right? I want to know why I should believe it's true or false. Good support is true, bad support is false. Okay. I want to point to something. It combines the ideas of non-action. It also should be an example which proves my claim that philosophy gives us ideas, big metaphysical ideas, then shows us how those can transform into ethics or a way of life, and then shows us how those can make us happy. Okay, so this is an example of how we move from big abstract ideas to practical ways of life with the goal of becoming happy. It's also an example of non-action, and we'll see there's a third benefit to this in a moment. Okay. 83 says, deal with the small before it's large. Begin the difficult while it's still easy. Approach the great work through a series of small tasks, because the largest evergreen grows from a tiny seedling. Okay. So you see how that goes from abstract ideas about how nature is. Nature starts from the small and grows to the large. You should do the same. That's an ethical claim, and then it basically says you will avoid difficulty and trouble, therefore you will be happier if you live like nature does. Here's the big idea of what nature is. You see that? You see that move? Okay. And it's also non-action because it's saying, again, non-action is action, but it's action with activity and passivity mixed. It's action which waits and takes suggestions from the world. It's actions that don't look only at the self and its own desires, but look at the desire of the world itself, the way of the world itself. That's non-action. So, what might that say about our class? This is why I teach the outlines. This is why I assign outlines. This is why I have you do things like reading journals, right? This is why I make you do discussion and a reading and recordings. Because if I just threw these books at you and said, figure it out on your own. Oh, by the way, you have to write a paper on it. With no small steps in between. With no support when things are still easy before they get too hard, it'd be very hard for you to do well in this class. So I say this half jokingly, but I'm absolutely serious about it as well. Daoism says that I should assign outlines before your papers. Daoism says that I should make your work due every week, not every day, but every week, and not only at the end of the semester. Because we have to make it easy for ourselves, small steps, if we're ever going to take a long journey. If we're ever going to have great success, we have to break up the task into small, doable pieces that we can achieve through non-action instead of one giant, impossibly large dream that we're going to try to force through sheer strength all at the end. So I'm joking around being like, Daoism, the fourth moral tenet of Daoism says you should do an outline before your paper. But I really do mean it, is that in life, and I've tried to make it be in this class, if you break things up into small parts, you do better and you do it faster than if you try to do it all at once in one big clump. If you prepare the way and the path for yourself, instead of just hoping that you can wing it and push through at the last minute. Okay? So we're going to wrap up here with the last main section. Okay? It's a section on government and leadership. Now you could take leadership as being the head of a family. You can take it as running a country. You can take it as having a position of power or leadership in your community or business. Okay? And this is what Daoism says. Once more, what it recommends you should do in life looks just like what it says the universe is. 88, section 88. The best leader is invisible. The next best leader is loved and praised. The next best, so it's getting worse, is feared, and the worst is ridiculed. 90 says, ruling a large state is like frying a small fish. Cook it too much and you ruin it. Poke at it too much and it falls apart. Okay? So, a lot of people will read this and go, oh, Daoism. It suggests a small, limited government. A lot of Americans want a small, limited government, and that's fine. Now, a lot of people say here, I see. I agree with Daoism. I think we should have a hands-off government, that the best community is one where individuals are allowed to be free. I guess I'm a Taoist. I've been a Taoist the whole time. Okay? What I would say, though, is remember, a philosophy isn't just the conclusions. Small government, don't poke people too much. Be invisible, let people do what they'll do and it'll come out naturally and therefore good. Okay? It's not just the conclusions, it's all the proof and the arguments they gave before. That's part of why I was repeating this idea that even Taoism doesn't just say what it intuits, it tries to prove or argue for what its claims are. Because I just want you to understand, the point here isn't exactly about Taoism or small government, but a more general point. If you think that you agree with Taoism on this government point, but you don't agree with the support, that is, you don't believe that the universe is one, and that the universe has its own natural ways that you can't really resist, you should go along with. So again, if you think that you agree with Taoism on this government point, this leadership point, but you don't agree with the background support for it, the claims about the universe and the metaphysics, then you don't actually agree with Taoism even on the government point. Because the government point here is only an extension of those metaphysical claims about the Tao or the way. So if you don't agree with the Tao or the way, the big idea is you can't agree with this way of saying that government should be small and hands-off. You're agreeing with a name, basically, and not the real idea. Does that make sense? So you can't say, I agree with Taoism on the result of this idea, but I don't agree with the idea it came from. Because they're sort of unified. They're joined up. Now you can say Daoism and I both think small government, hands-off government are good. But that's like saying your name is Chris and my name is Chris. There is some agreement there, but it's a name agreement. And names don't get at the essence or core truth to it. It's almost like it's a coincidence. Once more, I say that to make a point about how ideas fit together and to make a point about what it means to agree with a philosopher. I'm not saying if you're into small government you should or shouldn't be a Taoist. That's not my point. It's about how ideas fit together and how certain ideas may seem similar, but if their support, their philosophical backup or support is different, then it's actually a different idea that just coincidentally has the same name. You know, Christopher Columbus and I have the same name. We're different dudes. Taoist praise of small government and hands-off government and hands-off leadership is different than most Americans' praise of small government and hands-off leadership. The name is the same, the core essence is different. One more point about government and I will cut you loose and we'll be done for the day. Okay. 98. This is a point both about how government should act and how individuals should act. Remember, in Taoism, if my actions as an individual are supposed to resemble those of the universe, then everything in between should probably resemble both good individual action and good universal action, right? Okay. So when it's talking about violence here, it both is talking about the government or state, and it's talking about you as an individual. And that's probably not clear because it sounds like it's just the government, but it's the government and you at once. 98 says, don't deal in violence because violence always rebounds. Don't glorify in war. Use weapons, but only when there's no other choice. Okay? After war, famines come. And implied here, that's the end of the quote, is that after war, there's famines. After famines, there's war. The cycle starts again and again. Okay? The point is both about governments, and I'll give you an example in a moment, but also about personal life. Okay? So, the example is this, and it's just sort of an off-the-cuff example. It should apply more generally. I'm not saying anything about any particular countries here. Okay, you've all heard, right, that World War II was caused in part by the fact that there was already a World War I. And I bet you've all heard that World War I was called the war to end all wars, and it wasn't. It actually produced the Second World War, which is the biggest war we've seen since. Now, it's complicated, but the end of the Second World War, among other things, Russia and the U.S. and other countries, basically Russia got half of Berlin and the U.S. got the other half of Berlin. That was part of the Cold War, the next big war. The Cold War led the U.S. and Russia to fight each other in Afghanistan, where both sides armed local people and had them fight each other because we both thought if we could control Afghanistan, we could control the Middle East. Well, after the U.S. and Russia leave, because the Cold War's over, famine basically happens in Afghanistan. The Taliban come into power. The Taliban allow Al-Qaeda to group and stage the September 11th attacks from Afghanistan. After the September 11th attacks, we go to Afghanistan, where we still are, and it's the longest war in U.S. history. Oh, Vietnam also is an offshoot of the Cold War, which is an offshoot of World War II. which is an offshoot of World War One, which here my history sort of peters out, but that might be an offshoot of the 30 Years' War and other European troubles before. It's definitely World War One's definitely a result of the collapse of the Habsburg Empire. That's partly, or it's involved in that, and that's partly because they overextended themselves through what? War, right? So again, I'm not saying we shouldn't have been in Vietnam or Afghanistan. I'm not making those kinds of claims. Leave those to your political science professors. What I'm saying is the world shows us that Taoism is right, that violence rebounds. Violence caused by one, even if it's for legitimate reasons, rebounds and becomes violence against them later on. And one war just leads to the next war. Again, I'm not saying, neither is Taoism necessarily saying that we shouldn't go to war. Good luck with that. What it's saying, though, is think about that for your own state, but also think about it for your own life. Every time you are aggressive or try to control and dominate someone else, it will somehow come back as aggression against you, someone else trying to control you, someone else trying to dominate you. Even if you win, we won World War II, you will still find yourself in another battle, the Cold War, afterwards. If you have non-action instead, you only do what's necessary and natural. After calm reflection, you will not find yourself needing to be as aggressive or warlike as often. So you will cut off aggressive action instead of rebounding it on others and on yourself. Does that make sense? Okay, if you want more proof for this, Game of Thrones. Okay? Part of the reason we all like Game of Thrones so much is that it shows that some of these things are out of your control. If you're a good guy and you have to go to King's Landing's filled with bad guys and bad women. You're going to get into trouble. If you end up killing someone, even if it's the right thing to do, some violent action is going to chase you down the rest of your life. There are forces outside of our control. Hello, it's called the world itself. And if you try to violate that world, a rebound, equal and opposite reaction is bound to come your way. Right? There are forces, the White Walkers, politics, all this stuff. There are things which are bigger than you and outside of your control. And if you try to stab one of them, something violent in return is going to happen to you. But if through non-action you can find a way to deal with it without aggression and without violence, you end the cycle of violence. If, even to defend yourself, you act violently or aggressive to preserve yourself, you can be sure there will be some legacy of that violence coming behind you. Oh, so now I'm thinking it's also like the Kill Bill movies by Tarantino. It's like actual history, Cold War. It's like Game of Thrones. It's like Kill Bill. Everything's adding up, isn't it? All the proof you could possibly ask for. Okay. That's it. That's going to be our recordings for Daoism. As always, email me if you have any questions. I'm looking forward to seeing your comments in the discussion board. Thanks, everyone.